Today we have Rob Fee on the podcast. He's a close friend of mine, and he's going to share his story today about how he went from Army officer to financial advisor with CapTrust. His warmth and intelligence is going to come through in the podcast and interview, and I hope you enjoy today's episode.
Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
Hey, buddy.
What's going on? How are you guys?
What's up, man?
Good.
Griffin, nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you, Rob. How are you?
I'm good.
We worked very closely at different times in my life. Very different units for sure.
We both have been subjected to the mad scientist in Jack Williams. Rob, what you're telling me is I owe you a thank you for polishing him on his way to being my company commander.
I think it was entirely my doing. Yeah. I'm going to take full credit for it.
It definitely wasn't MCCC.
No, it had nothing to do with anybody else. It was all me.
MCCC probably brought me down, if anything. So Rob and I were on tanks together at Fort Riley, and I mean, phenomenal dude. You're so contagious with your personality. I don't think many people could say that they don't like you because you're just a happy guy. I was telling Griffin, I think as far as just people who come off as intelligent but also very, very warm, you're like one of the solid people there. You're so warm. People just, I think, gravitate towards you, and I think that showed in your leadership. And I'm excited to kind of catch up a little bit because it's been a while since we've really talked about your transition. I know when we end up on the phone for an hour or two sometimes talking about business or whatever. But I'm excited to catch up again and kind of give people an idea of what you did and how it worked out for you, because I know there's no doubt in my mind that you're quite successful, and you're going to be even more successful as the decades roll. But I'm excited to hear about how the transition went for you, and now that you're a little distant from it, right? How the last year has changed and how your perspective has changed on what other people can do. So
I appreciate that string of wholly unearned compliments. Thank you for saying that.
yes, and that goes again, it's very earned. There's no doubt in my mind. I mean, I think no matter what you're doing and what you're putting your mind to, it's a phenomenal thing. But you care about people, and that goes beyond whatever industry you're in. When you care about individuals, that's going to help you no matter what. But with that being said, the first kind of thing we can jump into is just tell us about your military experience, kind of where you started, how you served, and then we can talk about the transition a little bit as well.
Sure. So I'm West Point class of 14, commissioned as an armor officer, obviously armor basic course out at Fort Benning. And then first duty station was Fort Riley with 163 armor in D company. I was at the PX or something, getting my first day on Fort Riley in processing when I got a call from Jack Williams, and he said, "Is this Lieutenant Fee?" And I was like, "Yes." And he goes, "Great. You're taking a platoon tomorrow. Come on down." I was like, "Okay, great." So got to take over first platoon in D company, which wound up being first platoon in B company when we did the triangular redesign of the armor battalions and the armored brigades. Then I was the S4 for 163 armor before going to Triple C. 2 deployments in there. One, a Spartan Shield Inherent Resolve rotation to Kuwait and Bahrain. One, a Atlantic Resolve rotation to Germany. Triple C at Fort Benning, and then Fort Hood. I was in the 3rd Cavalry Regiment in 4 Squadron as an AS3, and then moved on to take command of Quicksilver Troop, which was the anti-tank company, and then the HHT Troop Commander before then out processing.
So we actually linked back up in Germany when I was stationed there and you were deployed there for Atlantic Resolve. So in fact, Griffin, we probably were, depending on the month, when I can't remember exactly when it was, but we might have all been in the same in the same little area there prior to you going to the Ranger Regiment.
So you were in the good old Camp Aachen tent city for
Yeah, I was
not experiencing Europe at all.
That was something that I hope to never do again in my life.
That was pre-COVID, I assume, right?
It was pre-COVID. It was 2017 to 2018. That was one of the first rotations. I think we were the second or third rotation of the Armor Brigade into Germany. So they still hadn't quite figured the logistics of that whole movement out, and the kind of transition into Camp Aachen, the way the motor pools were set up, the way the training was kind of established was all being figured out while we were there. And it was certainly challenging in its own ways, not obviously as challenging as a Iraq or Afghanistan deployment, but its own different type of challenges.
Yeah, I wouldn't take that challenge, I don't think.
Yeah.
We definitely were all three there at the same time. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I had a buddy that was there. I think it was probably the rotation right after you, I would guess.
Okay.
And they, for whatever, I know the units kind of had different regulations on how much you could do, how much you could leave and go see the outside world. And his unit was particularly strict, 0 leaving, no passes, nothing at all. But I won't mention his name because I sprung him loose a few times and it was a good time.
My neighbor in Germany. So when we were stationed there together, he was my neighbor. So we were both living there with our families, and he got orders to go to Fort Hood and moved his whole family to Fort Hood. And a month later was back at Aachen, deployed now without his family. And he was like, why did I do this? And he was like, he was like a doctor. He was like a surgeon for the brigade. So he was like, I'm not in charge of a unit. I'm doing the exact same job I'm doing. I'm just not with my family in my home. It's just like just not great accommodations. But tell me about your company command time. Did you, because obviously after that is when you decided to transition. Did you transition out as a company commander, or was there a job after that?
No, I transitioned out as the HHT commander. My first company was Quicksilver, and I have never had more fun in my entire life than being the anti-tank troop commander. I love those dudes. When I took over, it was really a tough time in the company, but my first sergeant and my executive officer were outstanding. And I knew that there's a lot of quality in the people that were there. They just maybe weren't as well nurtured as they needed to be. And so pulling that out of them, really focusing on kind of what I saw as our mission going forward with Stryker, MGS, and ATGMs, it's very hard to talk to them about the war on terror because who cares? I mean, there's scouts that want to be out doing scout stuff and infantry that want to be kicking indoors. They don't want to be shooting guns on MGSs like tankers or missiles on ATGMs like gun bunnies. They want to be out doing stuff. And so trying to teach them that the next war is not about anti-terrorism in Iraq or Afghanistan. It's about full-scale conflict with a peer threat like Russia or China helped revitalize and turn that company around. We wound up getting what used to be the Draper Award, the Armor and Cavalry Leadership Award. So that was a really terrific time. Happy to take over HHT. Love those dudes. Helped stand up a sniper segment. Ran the medics. Just a whole lot going on with that. But about the time that I took over HHT, just about 2 weeks later, my son was born. And I started to think about those 5 a.m. start time, 9 p.m. going home. And I was like, I don't know that I really want to do this for the rest of my life. He's my buddy, and I really like spending time with him. And as much as I love my time in the Army, I didn't know that the sacrifices needed as a S3 or an XO moving through that kind of career progression was going to be worth it in my eyes to my future. So kind of when I made that decision was about 3 months after he was born.
We've heard a lot of that, and I think Griffin and I can both resonate with that. I think we both made similar decisions. Once kids are involved, the decision making is a lot different. Were you planning on, so with West Point and everything, were you planning on doing company command, or was it more of like, hey, maybe plan for 5 and fly, and then you got enticed by your incredibly amazing friendship and leadership from me as a mentor, as a lieutenant?
No, I think company command was always kind of that one thing I wanted to have going into the Army. I know everybody gets to do it, so it's not like this, everybody who stays in gets to do it. It's not this incredible achievement or anything, but it was the thing that for me was kind of that pinnacle of frontline leadership. When you're a little kid I was in 4th grade at 9/11, right about the time Band of Brothers came out. So you're watching Band of Brothers, and what you see the whole time is Dick Winters leading a company, and you kind of go, well, yeah, that's the Army. I got to do that. And so for me, that was the thing where just as I got older and developed more, I said, I'm going to be a company commander. I don't know what happens next. If I'm still having fun, I'm going to keep doing it. No plan to get out, no plan to stay in, just a plan to be a company commander, see what that looks like on the other side of it, make a decision at that point.
Did you kind of start putting things in place well before you got out, or how did you approach those stepping stones?
Yeah, I actually had some pretty good support from leadership right around the time that it was time for me to really begin that transition. I had about 6 months of transition time where I didn't really have a job. I did a CSP. And so I was able to get support to go do a CSP. It was a self-directed CSP with Fee Insurance Group here in Hutchinson. And that gave me the freedom to not have to be in the Army while I figured out what I was going to do at the end of all of it. So I'm grateful for that opportunity and the ability to actually make that transition happen without having to also juggle command responsibilities. I did my command time all the way through, did the full transition to the new commander without without taking the time to try and transition myself. That maybe was or wasn't the right call, because I certainly short-ended myself on the backside with how much time I had to go through the whole process of finding a career, out processing the post, going to CIF and whatever that entails. But for me, it was the right call. It was the right call for the guys. And so that was kind of what drove me on that one. And then the CSP, the only thing I had to worry about was what was I going to do next?
Tell me more about the CSP process, because I think it's hard to find data, but I think fewer than 10% of people actually do a career skills program or some sort of corporate fellowship. And I don't, it's not always for lack of trying. Sometimes it's lack of command endorsement. But could you say a little bit more about your experience, who you went to for this kind of the self-directed portion of it? Because I think a lot of people could benefit from how others did the process.
Sure. I actually went to a friend of mine who did a self-directed with his father-in-law out in Scottsdale, Arizona. And so I just kind of got his packet, what he put together. It's takes some work on your end to do the self-directed one. You got to put together, what's your program going to look like? What are you going to learn and walk away from this with? Skills that this is going to help you develop, things like that. It can't just be I just want time to go think about myself. No, that's not a good reason for the Army to give up a captain for 6 months. They need a good reason. And so when you work through and develop kind of what that step-by-step process looks like, how it grows and how you compound your skills over that time period, then you're able to develop a good CSP that you have now an argument to go to your leadership with. At that point, it's all in leadership. And luckily, I guess I made a good enough reputation with my leadership that they were willing to give me the opportunity. I don't know that all leadership has that mentality. I don't know that all leadership needs you to have a good reputation, or that even if you do, if they care. I was just lucky, right time, right place, right person, I guess, and got that CSP approved. But it was one of the smartest decisions I made, was being able to take that time for myself. It was one of the best things that my leadership could have done for me, was give me the opportunity to just go out and focus on specifically what that next step was. And so I'd encourage anybody thinking about getting out to put that top of mind.
Completely agree, man. I mean, I did a CSP as well. It was amazing. I mean, I ended up not doing the job that I did during my CSP is not what I'm doing now, but I ended up learning a ton, met some amazing people, and it was such a great way to smooth the transition out. Who was a specific point of not the person, but like the office within the Army so that you put together the plan, got endorsement from your chain of command, and then did you submit the packet to some specific entity, or how did you do that?
Nope. Brigade commander approval.
Really?
Yep. So once he approved it, once legal signed off on it, and mine being self-directed, I need the CEO of the company that I was going to do the CSP with to sign off on it, which was thankfully my dad. So that made it a little bit easier to get the signature. But once that was done, that was it. I was good to go.
Your dad's like, I'll sign this thing, man, but
Yeah,
it's not going to come cheap.
No, it did not. And you know what? I didn't actually end up working for Fee Insurance. So same as you, I did the CSP, and what it actually did was tell me what I didn't want to do. And that's a really good thing to learn as well.
Absolutely.
We've been trying to harp on that with people. Just if you don't know what you're going to do, you can still pursue something like this. And whether or not it's your life's calling, but it might be a chance for you to confirm that you don't want to do whatever it is. So,
Yeah, it helps you teach you kind of what skill sets you actually have out in the private sector and whether they fit into that thing that you think you want to do or not.
yeah.
You don't know. For me, I just didn't want to sell insurance. And I just couldn't really I couldn't come to grips with it. And my cousins were already at that company, and my uncle's an owner with my dad over there. So for me, it was just like, hey, this is not for me. It's in good hands. The fees continue to run fee insurance. I have my freedom to go and do what I need. And to my dad's credit, he just wanted me to do what made me happy. And it was not a pressure. You got to come back to the family business. It was more of a, if you'd like to, here's what it looks like. And I'm able to learn that no, I don't want to, I don't want to sell that. I can't do that.
Well, it sounds like
Yeah,
you've got
that's
an awesome
that's
family
awesome.
if they're taking that approach. That's
Yeah,
that's
they're
great.
pretty good. I'm pretty lucky. I'll tell
That's
you that.
not
Supportive.
I've heard different stories before. So I'm assuming you picked up a significant number of skills and not only not what you didn't end up wanting to do, but like building blocks that have led to what you're doing now, not only from the Army, but in selling insurance and in that CSP. Can you talk more about what you're doing now and kind of how Army skills and your CSP skills are contributing to success today?
Sure. So I'm a financial advisor for Cap Trust. And in my practice with my partner, David Neal, we run a multifamily office. So that means we do advanced estate planning, tax planning, insurance planning, bespoke portfolios for high net worth and ultra high net worth individuals and families. There's myriad of skills in that are hard skills that you don't have and you won't have until you go take the necessary courses. I'm in the middle of getting a CFP right now. That teaches you a lot of stuff like the tax piece and the advanced estate piece. But soft skills that you learn in the military are very hard to replicate in everyday life. Problem solving is, I would say, the number one skill that you walk away from officership with and senior NCOs walk away with that other people their age just don't have. Because I don't know about you guys, but when I was in the Army, I got a whole bunch of tasks without enough people and without enough stuff to do it. And there was no, if you don't feel like doing it, you don't need to do it. No, you're going to get it done. You're just going to figure out how.
I always had enough people and enough
Right.
resources, and
That's
The
because you took it
173rd
from
is
Jack.
great for that.
yeah, it's because I had you and Griffin.
You took the resources away from me so you could do your thing. So you walk into any kind of problem with the mindset that I can find a solution to this. I just need to take the time and think through it. That's a super important skill in a career where you're looking at how do we transition from owning the family, from owning this business to the next generation in a tax advantage manner. How do we get it out of the state so it's protected from future ex-spouses? And so the growth is protected from estate taxes or the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act sunset. What assets need to get moved? What lawyers do we use to do this? Do you use grant or retained annuity trust? Are they charitably minded? Do you need to try and create a charitable retained annuity trust or some other form of a charitable institution? What are your different options? And then how do you go about solving this problem? And I think it's easy to get overwhelmed when the problems get large. But one thing you do walk away from being a Army officer on a shoestring budget is you can solve this problem with the right time and energy. That's been a big one. I think interacting with people has been a really big one. How do you talk to every type of person from every type of background? You never know who is the millionaire next door. You never know who you're going to talk to or what their background was or their upbringing. And being comfortable talking to all kinds of people is an extremely valuable skill for you to just walk into a room and create a connection with somebody that you're trying to help. And if they don't feel like you're trying to help them, then you're really not able to help them. So you're not really doing your job because they're not going to take your advice. So what's the point in giving advice if they don't trust you and they don't feel like you actually care about them?
I imagine you find yourself back in the shoes of HHT company commander, where you're like in the army, you're translating between the medics and the mortars, or maybe the UAS sec. It's like just disparate
Yeah.
people, personalities, and lingo. And then in your current job, you're doing in the exact same spot. You're communicating between very different types of professions, different levels of awareness of financial terms that you just mentioned.
Right.
And I have to imagine that's a daily occurrence, right?
It absolutely is. And the way we view ourselves is as the quarterback of this team that helps this family with their entire financial life. We talk to the CPA, we talk to the estate attorney, we talk to the insurance agent, or we sell the life insurance ourselves. We have some people in our company that are really, really high level, ultra high net worth type insurance, irrevocable life insurance trusts, and things like that. That are some different types of policies they can put together. But we run that relationship for the family, and we're kind of their go to person. So we have to know not how to draft a trust or a series of documents. That's what the lawyer does, but how to communicate with that lawyer and then take the lawyer's communication back to the client and act as an intermediary, understand the overall picture, and then be able to implement what we think is the right path forward. It's a lot of things that a company commander typically does on a day-to-day basis. You've got all these different organizations, all these different entities, and you have to see the big picture and put it into practice.
How much did you know about advanced financial planning when you were getting out? I mean,
Zero.
I bet somebody listening to this is like, this dude knows what he's talking. And then, but
I knew absolutely zero when I was getting out. I did during that CSP, I did a bunch of exploratory meetings. I was very lucky to be able to network well growing up, and then for my dad to be networking well for his last 59 years. And so I took advantage of that network to set up meetings. And the meetings were not to get a job. It was a lot of it was, hey, what am I good at that you think I could do? And talking to a lot of people, and I wound up having some very cool meetings with high up guys at Coke, with some really important guys in Wichita, and then some phenomenal people all throughout South Central Kansas, Kansas City, and just asking questions. What do you do? Why do you like it? What's good about it? Do I have any skills that you think could be useful in this? Are there any other jobs you think I should talk to somebody about? And then they'd connect me with somebody and I'd have another meeting. And I wound up sitting down for lunch with David Neal. And my family's actually known David's for multiple generations now. My uncle was David's football coach in high school. So long history with him. Never talked to him about his job, sat down for lunch with him at Prairie Dunes one day, had about an hour and a half lunch. And we both kind of walked away from it like, yeah, this is going to work. And had one more meeting with the CEO at Frontier, and I was hired about 2 weeks later.
Well, I mentioned your warmth in the intro in a way, but I also remember how you were always very focused on finances. You had your stocks, you had your investments, you were very into it. So it was not a surprise to me when you got into this, because you may have thought that you didn't have all the skills that you have now, because I'm sure looking back, you're like, I knew nothing. But compared to most, you were already very, very financially literate compared to the average lieutenant that comes to the unit, and you're like, okay, I got to help this guy like get a car loan and make sure you treat him like a private in a way. But you were very much so well ahead of your time. It speaks to kind of the same message we've been trying to tell a lot of people is sometimes you can follow your passions to make money. And then we've also acknowledged that sometimes the hard work is what makes the money for you to pursue your passions. But if you can find, it seems like what you're doing, even back then, I could tell that you were you loved finance, you loved that realm, you knew how to, talk the talk. So I'm glad you found something that seemed to me like right up your alley.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It certainly just kind of clicked when I had that lunch and just fell into place.
What could people who are thinking of transitioning out do to maybe set themselves up for a successful entry level career into what you're doing? Is there any sort of exams or things that they can do prior to actually transitioning out?
Yeah, if financial planning or financial advising is something you're really interested in, The American College of Financial Planning offers a military scholarship to get a CFP, which is CFP is kind of, it's certified financial planner. It is kind of that credential, for lack of a better word, that means what you're doing when you're putting together a overall financial plan for somebody's future. Everything from buying a house to retirement planning to college. You've gone through the process. You've learned about investments. You've learned about taxes and estate, and you know what you're talking about. That certification certainly helps you from a professional level where people are more at ease taking your advice. You can go get that for free through the American College if you sign up for their veteran scholarship. Last year, they didn't even give out all the scholarships they had available. So something you can take advantage of. It's 7 classes, and then you got to take the overall CFP finals.
Is it the type of license that needs to be hung at some sort of firm, or can you just hold the license with no other obligation?
It doesn't have to be hung at any firm. You pay every year to be a certified financial planner. Then you got to take continuing education credits every year.
Okay.
Firms will pay for some of that. Like they'll help pay to keep your license updated. They'll pay for continuing education. So if you're just doing it on your own, you may have to pay a little out of pocket, but you can also take all the classes through the American College and wait to take the test. You don't actually earn the letters until you've had 3 years in the industry. So
Right.
take and pass the test, but until you have your 3 years, you're not actually a CFP. You've just passed the CFP exam. The other designation that you might want to look at if you're looking to get into finance would be a CFA, a certified financial analyst. So those are the people that understand how to look at the investments, stocks, bonds, private equity, venture capital, private credit, private real estate, all those different alternatives, and understand, where does this fit? Is this a good investment or a bad investment? What's the 50-day moving average mean? Why do we care that this has a peg ratio of 1 as opposed to 3? Understanding kind of those pieces of that puzzle. That's a good one to do sort of at an entry level that I think you can do before you ever actually get a job doing this.
I'm always curious. It seems like you networked pretty widely while you were still in the Army through your transition process. I mean, I think there's a lot of lessons for people to take there. Start networking soon.
Yeah.
And networking is as simple as having conversations at a meal like you did, not some like fancy thing that people talk about on LinkedIn. But I'm curious, how did you go about getting clients, going from self-proclaimed knowing very little about the financial industry to now where you are? And is it different than how others do, or what's kind of the standard way of getting people to work with? Because I imagine going from recently transitioned Army person to working with very high net worth family offices or families, there's a big chasm there. So I'm curious.
Sure. Well, what I've said is that David's my partner. We work as a team. So there's me and David and another advisor who is our head planner, Sydney, and then our client consultant, Tracy. And so between the 4 of us, that's the team that goes in on all of these meetings with prospects. There's no just Rob going out, hey, knocking on your door, biggest house I can find in the neighborhood. Hey there, how you doing today?
Oh wait, that's
No.
Jack's house.
Yeah, exactly. We get referrals from our clients. We prospect somewhat organically out, just out kind of in daily life, making sure that you're doing the right things with the right people at the right time and having the conversations, being a professional, having a reputation that people want to talk to you. And then David's been doing it for 23 years. So he's got a pretty large network that every so often a referral rolls in from. And that's kind of how we pursue it. Being on boards, taking a active part in your community, making sure that you're just doing the right things to do the right things typically leads to good business for you in the future. That is not the way that most people do it. That's how a multifamily office sort of works, because you can't just use a prospecting tool to go find ultra high net worth families. That doesn't really fit our model. But CapTrust has a series of great tools that they use to help new advisors that they call blue teamers get started, find opportunities. They work with Charles Schwab and Fidelity and Pershing They work with Smart Asset and Zoe and find all these different ways to create referral generation and give you the opportunity to talk to somebody who's looking for advice.
In that case, they're likely doing a good bit of cold calling or trying to establish relationships, whereas you have a referral is by far the best lead you could get. And so you're starting off on second base when they're like trying to choke out a base hit sometimes.
Sometimes, yeah. Now, luckily, with the way Cap Trust works with a lot of our referral partners, these are pretty warm handoffs from like a Schwab advisor or a Fidelity advisor. They tend to be a good warm handoff as long as you make a good relationship with Charles Schwab or with Pershing or whoever it is that you're working with. For the most part, those guys have a bunch of meetings every year, and we've got a really good win rate because of how good our company's reputation is and how good our advisor force actually is. So they have a much easier time than probably the Edward Jones guy on the corner does. Edward Jones infamously has a tough training regimen, and they have to go. They still go knock actual doors. So our guys have a little bit easier pathway, but that's just the company that we are.
I know you're physically in Kansas, but you can help people nationally, right? There is no geographic limitations.
No, we have clients in 38 states right now. We just don't really know people in North Dakota or Wyoming.
So if you're listening to this and you're in North Dakota, Wyoming, Rob is your man.
Yeah.
Right.
No, we don't have any licensing restrictions, and we're able to help people. Cap Trust has 85 plus locations now. We're a national company.
Man, I can make bad jokes in every state, so it's fine.
Right.
Rob, I always want to ask people that manage significant amounts of money or advise significant amounts of money, what's the difference between allocating that amount of capital and allocating your personal capital?
Really none, just bigger numbers. We invest in the same things that our clients invest in, because if it's a good investment for them, it's a good investment for us. And if it goes bad, we want it to go bad for us as well. And so we sit on the same side of the table as our client. And we make sure that when we suggest something to them, it's something that we're doing as well. I just met with my estate attorney last week, making sure that my trust is good and that we're up to date on everything. We had a daughter 4 months ago. So making sure we're up to date on everything. Everything is still established the way we want it to go, because we advise clients to go and meet with their estate attorney and make sure their estate is set up. So can't exactly not do it too. We buy the same stocks. We build the same portfolios. It depends on the client's time in life, their needs, their goals. Maybe they have more dividend paying stocks, or maybe they have more bonds than someone like me, because I'm more than willing to take a little extra risk. Maybe they don't want to use any options or derivatives, and I do, because I can leverage myself. It just depends. So there's really not a whole lot of difference except the number as far as putting the money to work.
Yeah, good job. That was the right answer. I am very curious though. Weren't there? I mean, there have to be allocations that are only available to institutional capital, right? That you can't invest in personally. Is that the case in certain instances?
There are certain alternatives that we'll get ourselves into, like private equity deals or some private credit deals that are limited for qualified or accredited investors that don't make exceptions for advisors. Sometimes they'll make an exception where an advisor having a license and a certain amount of knowledge is able to get into this investment despite not having the net worth requirement. But some of them do not, because of the huge demand, the huge interest in what this alternative is doing. And so we have a few of those, but for the most part, nothing really limiting as far as what we do.
I feel like offline, I want to ask you if there's going to be a recession here coming soon, but we'll.
I like that online. Let's look into Rob's.
We won't hold you accountable for your answer. 6 months from now, they're calling you like.
But if you're right, everyone's gonna love you.
That's right. That's a good question. There's a lot of really positive signs in the economy right now. There's a lot of really negative signs in the economy right now. I think Goldman Sachs gave it a 41% chance of a recession. That's one of the higher ones. JP Morgan recently increased it, but they're still pretty low. I think that if rates drop, there's still, as of a month ago, there was something like $6 trillion on the sideline of the S&P. So that means if rates are dropping, there's still $6 trillion that can go to work in the market. That's market moving money, which could mean a pretty good market year.
And all that's at Berkshire Hathaway?
He's only got
in cash.
277 billion in T-bills. Small potatoes, more than the Federal Reserve.
Right.
So I think that there's an opportunity for a recession still based on increased government spending, which leads to higher inflation, meaning we got to raise rates rather than continue to cut them, despite an emergency cut. And at the same time, any rate raise just puts more burden on our national budget, which is already sitting at a massive amount just to pay off debt. And at 5% debt instead of at 0% debt, we're talking about generational problems. That could be an issue. However, if Jerome Powell has gotten inflation under control, if government spending doesn't go wildly off the rails in the next 4 years, then there's a pretty good chance that we actually have that soft landing engineered that they've been talking about, or a no landing scenario, which is the other thing where it's not a soft landing. It's not a hard landing. It just kind of keeps going. It's a lower inflation, tight job market, no recession, kind of a no landing scenario. That's what the Fed is aiming to hit right now. I think it's going to be a stock picker's market for a little bit, especially at high rates. Smart money getting to work, finding companies that have no debt or little debt, meaning that once rates go down, they can take advantage of that to rapidly expand themselves. What they're doing, how the AI revolution is going to impact multitudes of companies. But at the same time, you got companies using AI in a good way with no debt, like CrowdStrike, that are getting slaughtered in the market because they caused a global outage. So
Time to buy.
it was a good time to buy. Yeah.
You don't have to get into super specifics, but I'm always curious, like, how do you think about, because there's a standard 80-20, there's all kinds of kind of like standard investment theses, but how do you think about allocation of capital? And maybe this isn't incredibly relevant for a transitioning service member who has been paid by the Army for the last X number of years, but down the road, a lot of service members I think can be pretty conservative with their capital and will have some assets to deploy. How do you think about allocating between, whether it's alternatives, equities, whatever it might be?
I completely refrain from giving blanket advice on,
And this is not financial advice on this podcast.
and advice
You
on
may or may not own the equities that are discussed.
I just don't think that you can give good blanket advice. I think that any financial advice has to be taking your personal situation into account as far as what are your plans? What are you thinking about? Just because you're 22 years old doesn't mean you should be in all equity. If you're thinking about buying a house in 5 years, you may need to make sure that you have a sizable portion that's put into a more safe investment. So today it could be bonds. In 2020, it was cash. I don't think there's any real good way to give a blanket set of advice out to somebody without understanding their scenario, where they're coming from, what their goals and ideas are, and what their risk tolerance and capacity is. And then once you kind of have a good understanding, you can start to piece together that overall portfolio construction, financial plan advice. And it's not quite as simple as, yeah, put it in 60-40 and let it roll.
Everyone listening to Rob describe this right now, that is how it should be described to you. Because I guarantee you, the vast majority of financial advisors you go talk to are going to not tell you that same thing, and they're going to put you in a standard portfolio that doesn't do much for your money, and you would be better off just investing in low cost index funds. So find Rob or someone like Rob that talks that same way, because that's how it should be done.
So another blanket advice question, because you clearly want to do that.
Yeah.
So going back to somebody who is transitioning out, say they have, they might not be at a position where they can pay for a financial advisor, or say they maybe have 40 or 50,000 or less in their TSP. What should they be doing with their TSP upon transitioning out? And do you have any thoughts on that?
Again, it all goes back to their particular situation. And I'd advise them to find a RIA, which is a registered investment advisor, either in their area, or a good national company like a cap trust that has a location nearby or an advisor nearby, and give them a call, tell them what your scenario is, and work from there. I just can't really give good blanket advice without knowing what their situation is. There's taxable consequences to rolling out of the TSP because the government's been putting money into the TSP as well. So If you've been putting in Roth and they're putting in traditional, now you roll it into your Roth IRA and you have income tax on the portion that's traditional. So I don't think that there really is a easy way for me to give blanket advice on something like that without knowing what situation they're in right now. So always call a financial advisor, find somebody that you trust, work through those scenarios and figure out what actually fits your situation the best.
Find someone that you trust.
That's right.
Well, let's go back to it then. So at least advice that you can feel less under the gun for people who are transitioning out. We've been asking really just every person on the podcast. We've been asking the same two questions. One is just one ask, and the other is one give. So do you have an ask that for our future listeners, the people who are going to be listening to this podcast, something they can do to help you out?
Not really, no. I guess my only ask would be that if you are already out of the Army and people getting out, help them. Help them network, help them learn how to network, and make sure that you understand that when you're setting up those networking calls, you tell the person this isn't a job interview. This is to go figure out what you want to do, who you want to know, where you want to be, things like that. And that's the only thing I would really ask is extend a hand and help people that are trying to get out of the Army. The Army doesn't help you get out of the Army. So don't rely on it too. You could rely on it for everything while you're in. Now you can't rely on it. So our network of veterans, West Point grads and otherwise, help. Just take the call from the guy who wants to network and then help them set up more calls. I think for me, the most important thing, my dad told me when I was getting out, he was like, okay, what do you want to do? So I started coming up with a list of jobs. And he's like, no, not a job. What did you really enjoy about the Army? And so then you say things like, well, shooting Abrams tanks is great. He's like, okay, let me see if I can be more specific here. What types of things were you doing on a day-to-day basis that you enjoyed doing? And boil that down to its most basic level. So for me, I like helping people. I like giving advice. I like complex problem solving. I like every day being new. I like having to think through multitudes of things at any one time. I don't want it to be standard. I don't want it to be a cookie cutter day or a cookie cutter job. And so I was able to piece together and wrote down my list. And then every time I talked to somebody about what they did, I had my list of things that I knew I was looking for in a career because I was no longer looking for a job. I was looking for a career. Write down that list, ask questions that involve that list, and then figure out if what you think you want to do is what you actually want to do. Does it match your list? Working on a team, this worked with David Neal. That doesn't work if you're trying to go be an Edward Jones advisor. They work independent. So you can't even just say that, well, financial advising is the thing to do because I had one meeting. You got to then boil it down more until you get to that list. And once you find the career that gives you that full list, you won't have to be the Army veteran who goes from one job to another trying to find the thing that makes them happy.
I imagine filing DTS vouchers were high on that list of.
Very high. That was my choice. Yeah. So I made sure that I had a job where I could just keep filing DTS vouchers.
Clicking through Army training as quickly as possible as well.
Yeah. Yeah. How much online training do you guys have? I hope it's over 100 hours a year.
Yeah. It better be more hours than are in the work week so I can feel at home.
Right.
Rob, I think you hit the nail on the head. I want to just go back really quickly to something you said. You mentioned when having those networking conversations, start off the conversation by saying, look, I'm not looking for a job. I'm just trying to learn and figure out what I might be good at or what. I think that's so important and really underrated because if you start off the conversation by kind of diffusing it like that, then there's no pressure on that person to like do a miracle and help you out. It's just like sharing of information freely and maybe something works out, maybe it doesn't. But I like the way that you lead with that because it's almost like it takes all the pressure out of it and all of a sudden you can have a real person-to-person conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes it a lot easier for you to ask questions when you don't feel like they're maybe going to be your employer and they don't feel like maybe I'm trying to offer this guy a job. It just becomes I'm trying to learn. And what I found is that at least here in South Central Kansas, everybody wants to help a veteran. They are so happy to take that call, to have coffee, to have a lunch, and just to answer your questions that as nervous as you are about reaching out and just saying like, will you meet with me and answer some stuff? They almost to a person, they will take that meeting. They'll give you 30 minutes of their day. They're happy to do it. That doesn't mean you're going to get a job out of every meeting. That doesn't mean you're going to find that thing you love every time, but it does mean you're going to meet somebody, ask some questions, learn something, maybe learn something about yourself, maybe learn something about them, but it's all worth it.
That's a great piece of advice. I don't want to speak for Griffin, but we've taken so much away from these conversations, just personally, let alone other people who are going to be listening to this. So thank you for that.
Well, they should pause this episode and write now and go write down the acronyms that Rob has mentioned.
Yeah,
The
right.
training, like, go look it up because that's how you. I mean, you don't just gloss past it and be like, well, that guy's smart. And look those things up because it might find something that surprises you. I also love.
Maybe I lied. You never know.
None of those acronyms exist except for DTS. That's the only real one.
That's right.
I think another thing to highlight, just because I think this is amazing advice, don't make a list of jobs because we don't know all the possibilities that are out there. And so we're just going to make a list of jobs that we know of. And the world is there's so much more possibility than I think nearly anyone understands or can comprehend when coming out of the military. And so I love the idea of just writing down what you really enjoy doing and then having open conversations to discover something, because your dad he's a smart guy. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree.
I don't let him hear that. He'll get a big head. I guess the last thing I'd say is take the opportunity. I took a pay cut taking my job with a little kid, bought a bigger house, stuff we couldn't quite fit into our budget right away, but I knew it was the right opportunity. I knew that it was a risk. And by the way, you're probably going to take a pay cut when you get out of the Army. Don't be afraid of that. That's just entry level. You get it all back the next year, more than likely. If you work hard, you'll get it all back. But don't be afraid to take an opportunity if it presents itself. That's what separates people who succeed from those who fail, in my opinion.
Yeah. I think officers, especially coming out of the military, don't appreciate how quickly you can advance in the civilian world because we're on such a strict career. I mean, you hit captain at 4 years, major at 10 or whatever. And so it's like, you can't get promotions outside of that. There's just no flexibility. But when you're to your point, it could be second or third year and all of a sudden you've doubled, tripled, quadrupled your salary pretty substantially. So that's something that few really appreciate when they're exiting.
Many of the companies take their evaluations seriously and they pay people who get good evaluations. Whereas especially as an officer, especially in the Army, it's hard to separate yourself even with phenomenal evaluations. There's certain parts of the Army and the military that you can definitely get rank quickly, but it's more so than just rank because oftentimes your evaluations are going to separate you from your peers, and that's going to lead to not just the promotions, but raises within that. And I think I was just at United Wholesale Mortgage for a week of corporate hoorah and
Shenanigans.
Corporate shenanigans. No, it was great, but it was surprising to hear coming from the military, the CEO and his I think one below the CEO, Matt Ishbia, his like right-hand man said, if you want to be paid like you're making $150,000, you need to work for at least a year like you're making that much money. Before you get paid that, you're going to have to work like you're getting paid that. And that was just so different than the kind of leadership you hear in the military. We promote working hard and we do that, of course, but it was just odd to me but it was motivating in a way. It was like the promotion is out there. The raise is out there. You're not going to get it the second you start working hard. It comes later. And that's the seeds you sow in the civilian sector that you can really reap the benefits down the line.
Yeah. I mean, you dedicate yourself, you work very hard, you advance your education in whatever it is that you're trying to do. For some people, that's an MBA. For some people, that's a CFP. For some people, that's a series of real estate licenses. It just depends on what you're doing, but work hard, focus on your career path and the path that is open to you, and sky's the limit as long as you work.
All right, Rob. Appreciate it, man. Thanks for coming on.
Happy to. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, this has been awesome.
Absolutely.
I learned some acronyms as well. I'm excited to look them up. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.